Hi everybody, welcome to History Club on this fine 27th of August. My name is Joe Walsh with the LGBTQIA Plus Heritage Project. We are happy tonight to be talking with Sarah Haveron, and Sarah is going to cover the topic of growing up in this place as intersex, and the title of the talk is Growing Up Between the Gaps. So Sarah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We
Thank
really
you very
appreciate
much.
it.
Sarah, she, her. And what I would like to do this evening is to concentrate mainly on what I would term my lived experience as an intersex person. But just to make sure everybody has a very basic overview, I would like to do a short presentation to start, growing up between the cracks. If you would do that, Joe, please.
Perfect.
Growing up between the cracks. That there comes from the fact that a great many occasions in my life, I fell through the cracks of society as an intersex person. And I would just like to start off by, touching on some of the intersex aspects, both in general and then for me personally. So next slide, please, Joe. Okay, there are some 40 plus variations of intersex characteristics. There's up to 1.7 percent of the population, which equates in more realizable terms as about as common as those with red hair in society. It can be known as disorders of sexual development, which it was for a long time, but that there is unacceptable definition simply because it uses the word disorders. That has been changed mainly in North America and the IOC and World Athletics, etc., into differences in sexual development. But more commonly nowadays, and particularly in Europe, it's known as variations of sexual characteristics. Each of the individual characteristics of an intersex variation combine to cause various aspects, within the population. And if we go to the next slide then, Joe, please. There's nothing new. In the past, so many intersex people were actually revered. They were seen as being gifted individuals. Ancient Greece, we saw people like Hermaphroditus, who was, the mythical explanation of intersex people. And, you'll notice the word hermaphrodite, coming there, and we'll discuss that in more general terms later. And but there's the child of Hermes and Aphrodite, and it is pictured on the right-hand side there. That is a statue of Hermaphroditus, and you'll see that there are female characteristics and male characteristics. In Judaism, there are actually in the Mishnah and Talmud between 6 and 8 variations. Only 2 of those are actually what we would term a binary male and a binary female. The 2 that I would most like to concentrate on tonight are androgynous and tum-tum. Those 2 variations are the ones that most readily be seen at birth. Androgynous would actually have both genitalia, ambiguous genitalia, whereas the tum-tum, their genitalia would not be decipherable. You couldn't tell whether it was male or female. Indian subcontinent, even to this day, we have the Herdra, who are seen as people of good fortune and are invited to christenings and weddings, etc., to bless, the nuptials, etc. Islam has its intersex variations. Americas, we know widely of, Two-Spirit, where individuals within a tribe would have assumed male, female. You could have female warriors. You could have had, male keepers of the food and the residences. Polynesia, the Mahu, again, basically a situation where you have people who are not seen as either male or female. And in Christianity, very often the word eunuch that was used by Isaiah was used by Christ himself. Very often it's used as a general term for those who are born intersex. And you know, it's a bit like the term leprosy, which was basically used to describe any skin disease at that time. Next slide, please, Joe. Now, in the top here, what we actually see is a phallometer. This is actually something that existed particularly in North America. At the time of a child's birth, the phallometer would be used to decide whether a child was female or male based on the size of the genitalia. If the clitoris is less than 3/8 of an inch, they would have diagnosed that person as a female, as a girl. If it was more than an inch, in other words, a penis, the baby would be assigned male. If it fell in between those two, falling in between those two cracks, the child, technically speaking, is intersex. And over so often, what would happen is that that child would be subjected to genital surgery at the time of their birth or very shortly afterwards, usually within the first 18 months. Certainly for me, it was at 18 months. Intersex people are born with sex characteristics such as sexual anatomy, reproductive organs, hormonal patterns, and/or chromosomal patterns that do not fit typical binary notions of male or female bodies. Experts estimate up to 1.7% of the population are born with intersex traits. That is a quotation from the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Next slide, please, Joe. What's in a name? Hermaphrodite. For a long, long time, hermaphrodite was seen as a slur. It was seen as being something which was used to denigrate a person who was born intersex. However, it is being reclaimed by some, those who were born in particular with ambiguous genitalia, very much along the same lines as queer is now being reclaimed within LGBTQIA plus society. There are two types in medical definition of hermaphrodite, and these are actually medical definitions. A pseudohermaphrodite is a mismatch between the gonads and the genitalia. So on the outside, a person may be male, but on the inside be female, or the opposite being female on the outside and male on the inside. A true hermaphrodite is someone who was born with mixed gonads, in other words, an ovary and a testy. This is where we go from the general to my personal experience in life. I was born with ambiguous genitalia. I had a very tiny penis. I had a vulva in the shape of, for want of a better word, labia majora, labia minora, and a blind vagina. The bifid scrotum is a medical term. It simply means that the skin that would normally be assigned as a scrotum is open and forms the labia majora and labia minora. Now, this primary hypogonadotropic hypogonadism simply means that your endocrine system doesn't produce the precursor hormones that affect either the testes or the ovaries to produce the sexual hormones that are necessary for sexual development. I also had partial androgen insensitivity syndrome, which means that in a body, you not only do the hormones have to be present, but the other aspects of the body have to be sensitive to them. In other words, react to them. So they have to be, the sensors there have to react to them. If they don't, that leads to either partial or, in a great many cases, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. And basically, you can have someone who is chromosomally XY, but to all intents and purposes, they will be seen as totally female, raised as female, have a vagina, have a vulva, have a clitoris, but very often they would not have a womb, and their body does not react to to testosterone or variations of it. And then in my case as well, I had ovotestis. That means that I had tissue that produced both male hormones, and I had a gonad that produced female hormones. So I not only had at birth did I have ambiguous genitalia, I had ambiguous gonads. And that's the intersex flag. So that if you see this, you will know in future that those people are making you aware of the existence, either that they are intersex or they're allies of those who are intersex. And that's the end of that particular aspect of the first presentation. Now, what I would like to do is to sort of work my way through my life, basically chronologically. I was born with ambiguous genitalia at 18 months. Well, sorry, at the very, very start, mommy decided, that whether I would be assigned boy or a girl. I could have been assigned either because I had both a small penis and I had a fully formed vulva and a blind vagina. Now, what a blind vagina is, it is a vagina that ends, closed off. It doesn't go into cervix. It doesn't, so it just ends at the vagina stage. What happened is that my labia were sealed. I had a penoscrotal hypospadia. That means my urethra came out into the scrotum, not into the penis itself. So I had an operation that transferred the end of my urethra to the tip of the penis. And as I say, at that time, that surgery was something I knew nothing about until about 8 years ago. At the same time, as part of some of the hormonal issues I had, I was born with a full cleft palate and cleft lip. So all of this surgery was carried out by a plastic surgeon in the Royal, and it was hidden behind my cleft palate. I couldn't understand later when I was researching the cleft palate how that my surgery in 1953, was supposed to be earth-breaking. It's only in hindsight, it wasn't the cleft palate surgery. It was the sexual reassignment surgery that was, part and parcel of, the surgeries that were starting as a result of, a psychologist in America called John Money. But Addie would tell you much more about him. Okay, so what happened is I was assigned boy. The strange thing about my birth certificate, now at that time, I was a home birth, which was not unusual at that time. But what would normally happen at that time is a short birth certificate would be issued with the child's name and their sex. And that's all basically, that was on and a date. And then later there will be a full registration done at the registry office, and the parents and all that will be added to that. Later, when I came to do some of this research, I actually found out that that small birth certificate is actually dated 10 days after the full registration date. So that wasn't issued for mummy to use for me until 7.5 weeks. In 6 weeks, it was registered in the registry office, but the short birth certificate wasn't issued for another 10 days. I'm not sure why, but particularly those first 18 months and the 4.5, I was raised as a girl, basically. All my friends were girls. I didn't associate with boys at all. All my underwear was female. I wore either shorts and a t-shirt with little cherub vests under, or I wore a little kilt. Daddy was Scottish, so it was passed away that way. But at that time, the only way I could actually urinate was sit down, because I urinated exactly as a girl urinates. Because my birth certificate said, boy, I was christened Joseph. And the strange, one of my friends, Audrey, came to the door. We were only about 2.5 or something at the time, and she knocked the door, and mummy answered the door, and Audrey says, "These are me and Joseph in." The simplicity of it all, but she knew it was one of those, but she wasn't sure which one. But, as I say, I have friends, Audrey, Janet, another Audrey, that is, Patricia, Bernie actually did a lot of, we used makeup, hair brushes, and she later on actually became a hairdresser and beautician, and Teresa, we played together all the time. Unfortunately, before I was due to start school at 4.5, I was told I would have to start school as a boy. And that just gave me terrible nightmares. Um, yeah, uh, One of the ones I remember so vividly, was waking up and screaming. The nightmare was that I was trying to cross these bridges to get back to being a girl. And as I stepped on the bridge, it started to crumble. And these people were standing laughing, saying, "Oh, you're never going to get back. You're never going to get back." And I woke up screaming, and it took mummy quite a time, to actually get me, settled to get me back to sleep. Probably the first time my gender stroke sex was ever questioned was at the paddling pool in Portrush. At that time, all my attire was still female, so my swimsuits were girls, all this. But for starting school, my hair was cut short as a boy. So there I was playing with girls, exactly. And this wee boy comes up and says to me, "You're a boy or girl?" You know, and says, "You have a boy's haircut. You're wearing girls. Are you a sissy?" So as I say, it was very, very disturbing. And I started as a boy, but I really didn't want to be there as a boy. It also, led to problems, because when it was discovered that I was still wearing girls' underwear at that stage, it got round the school. And it wasn't unusual in the playground that particularly boys would have come and pulled my trousers, my little shorts down and exposed my underwear, and then exposed my genitals. Um, it led to me being very unsettled, and I remember as a child getting out Encyclopedia Britannica and doing lots of study in relation to the genitals of males and females. And at one point, I had a friend, and she was telling me about menses, and that it come a point where you would bleed every month, etc. So in my very simple mind at that time, I thought, "Oh, what'll happen? This little bud I have will fall off, and I'll start bleeding the same as all my friends." But that didn't happen. But equally, I didn't develop either. And you know, when I was 9-year-old, mummy was diagnosed with breast cancer. Um, Thankfully, between the age of 5 and 8, she taught me to cook, she taught me to bake, she taught me to look after the house. Um, I'm a little late one, as the saying would go. My youngest brother is nearly 9 years older than me. At some parts of the year, he is actually 9 years older than me, birthday wise. Um, so they had all left home by the time Mummy was diagnosed with cancer. And between 9 and when she died at 11, she spent most of that time in hospital. She had told me that because I was so small and undeveloped, that if I didn't grow soon, they'd have to take me and start giving me monthly injections. Now, because of her own health problems, that never actually came to pass. I fell between the cracks. This is the first major crack that I fell through in my life. I never got the injections, which would have helped me. I didn't have a male puberty. I had a partial male puberty in my late teens. I can remember using mascara as a 15 and 16-year-old, trying to, bring in sideburns, etc. And in those days, the mascara was just in a little block, and you had a little brush, and you took a spittle and wet it. And so there I was, the bum fluff on either side, or trying to you know, to make it appear that I had a moustache with this mascara. But, you know, um, effectively in secondary school, I'd been very sporting in primary seven. I actually made the school soccer team. Unfortunately, not as the goalkeeper I wanted to be. It's only very recently, that when they showed a picture of our team when we won the league that year, I was one of probably the smallest and on the team. And that was why it was decided that I wouldn't be the goalkeeper. Um, but I was very sporting, and when I started school, I was immediately selected for the rugby team. I was good at running, kicking, a ball. Um, but within that first year in secondary school, between the age of 11 and 12, all the boys around me got bigger, heavier, stronger. I didn't change at all. I went from being on the A team to the B team to being left out totally. And that really, hurt me immensely from being someone who enjoyed sports so much. By the time summer came around and we were testing out for athletics, they laughed at me trying to throw a javelin. They laughed at me trying to long jump. So I just gave up totally, sport, at that period in my life. Mommy, as I say, died at 11. I basically raised myself. Daddy had a small part-time business in the morning where he distributed newspapers, etc., around all the news agents. And so he was up from 3:30 in the morning and wouldn't have been home to dark, because he worked in the construction industry. So basically, I was on my own from getting myself out to school in the morning until I came back. By the time I was 13, 14, my lack of puberty was very noticeable. I was get picked on a lot, particularly in the showers, where I'd get laughed at, I got walloped with towels, etc. The boys whipping me. But it wasn't just the boys, it got around, and I was a laughing stock for the girls as well. I most certainly was not dating material. Um, and from that point of view, I started mitching. And basically, in those days, you could leave school at 15. I left school at 14 and mitched between 14 and 15. I just didn't go to school. The attendance officer was a frequent visitor to our home. I sort of kept stalling it, putting it off until I could officially leave school. So I basically left school at 14-year-old. During that time as well, I got interested in boxing because I had some friends who and went to the parochial hall and were training as boxers. They'd set up All Saints Boxing Club. And after a few weeks general training, Father Dara put us in the ring, with my first opponent, was someone who was smaller and much broader than me, for a couple of rounds sparring. And then they put me in with another person who was much taller, and I sort of gauged, it was duck dive, duck dive, duck dive, and I timed it, and I threw a punch, and he basically headbutted my fist and broke his nose, and the blood was pouring out. And of course, I was all concerned, etc. for him. And Father Dara says to me, he says, "Son, you're never going to be a boxer. Don't bother coming back." But I was so upset that I, made his nose bleed, etc. I walked him home to make sure he got home safe that night. So yeah, boxing wasn't going to be for me. Um, Now there were various aspects of my character. At 15-year-old, I was at a dance in the town hall in Coleraine. I was wearing a pink denim shirt. Now, this is, bear in mind, this is early 1966. And I had pink denim shirt. I had fawn canvas trousers and desert boots. And I was dancing with the girls. I always danced with the girls, even at that stage. And I got picked on. A group of them, started, beating me up, kicking me around the floor. The only thing that saved me is the group pulled me up onto the stage. They perceived me as a poofter, and decided that, they didn't want poofters in Coleraine at that stage. And, the people who had helped me, we actually needed a police escort out of Coleraine that night because they tried to break into the changing room of the group, etc. So we needed the police to get us out. That was the first time I was ever physically abused, assuming that I was a gay male, which I've never have been in any shape or form. Around the same time, I tried dating girls, but the vast bulk of girls at that stage saw me as the gay boy. So they says, "Well, what does so and so do? What does that mean?" Etc. So I was the confidant for the girls, whereas none of them really saw me as dateable. However, I did start dating this girl. I was really, really fond of her, but after a few weeks, she said, "Oh, I can't go out with you anymore." And I said, "Well, why?" She says, "When I say who I'm going out with, who my boyfriend is, they all laugh at me. They say, 'What are you going out with that weirdo for?'" So that really hurt me too, in that, I was being rejected, from someone who, a vast bulk of the time, I just ignored him. But this was someone I really, was very emotionally tied to, and it hurt me greatly. The other aspect is I was still a virgin, and in fact, by the time I was married at 21, the only girl I'd ever been sexually intimate with in coitus was the girl I married. So that's how it impacted on me, that aspect. The first time that I remember I was dating this girl. Well, sorry, no, dating. No, we met in Barry's in Portrush. Her and her mate, and this chap. I no idea who he was, but we happened to be standing at the. There used to be the Speedway as you went into Barry's there, and we were standing chatting. These girls come over, and Jane took us to her place, and we were getting on really well. And she put her hand down my trousers, um, get up, went, and said to her friend, "We're going now." You know, so obviously, at that time I didn't join the dots. I was falling between the cracks again, and my naivety I didn't realize I was being rejected because of the size of my genitalia. As I got older, I started to turn to alcohol. I became a problem drinker. I drank as an anesthetic. I drank as a painkiller. I would just get to the point where I couldn't handle life anymore, and I would actually just gone and get blitzed. Thankfully, I'm now sober for over 31 years. And so much the better for it. I've accepted, my life is different from a great many others. And sometimes it has been advantageous, sometimes it hasn't. I didn't really get much into this intersex business, until I had health problems. And my doctor, who was a partial friend at that time, he did an assay of my hormones. Now, I was at this stage approaching 40. So he did an assay, and when the results came back, he said, "Oh, you are in very early andropause. You have the testosterone levels are in single figures. They would equate to an 80-plus-year-old man, and you have elevated female hormones that would equate to a late 30, early 40 female." So his answer at that time, without referral to an endocrinologist, referred me simply to testosterone. And I, at that time, actually felt this is the solution. This is what the problem has been all my life. I didn't produce enough testosterone. I didn't get male enough. I was a failed male simply because this wasn't diagnosed when I was young. I stayed on testosterone for 18 years. But by the time it came, about 16, 17 years, I was having serious health problems because of the testosterone. I was being referred to endocrinologists. I was being referred to urologists. The sad thing about it is, at that stage, I had a consultant urologist tell me, because I said, "No, testosterone's poisoning me. I want to stop it." He said, "I'll do a couple of wee operations on you. You're much too young to stop taking testosterone. I'll sort it out for you, and you can keep taking those testosterone injections." By that stage, I was having the libido 4 milliliter injections every 4 weeks. Now, most trans men, here would probably get one of those injections every 10 to 12 weeks. I was getting those every 4 weeks, and it was doing me harm. It certainly wasn't doing me good as a male. And that's the first time I got the diagnosis of partial androgen sensitivity syndrome, that said, even though I had lots and lots of testosterone in my system, it certainly wasn't virilizing me. And that made me think back to when I was 16, 17. I decided I was going to a gym. So I worked out 3, 4, times a week. Come to the third time to renew my 6 month subscription, the gym owner says, "Save your money, son. You're never ever going to develop. What you are now is what you'll always be. Your body doesn't want to react to training." In hindsight, that was because I didn't have enough testosterone. Also, 5-alpha reductase is what converts ordinary testosterone into a much more virulent dihydrotestosterone. And I was lacking in that conversion as well. And that in part also can lead to ambiguous genitalia, etc. So from that point of view, this consultant urologist wanted to perform this operation simply so I could keep taking testosterone. I said, well, what are the side effects? He says, well, you'll probably be urinary incontinent for anything between 3 and 6 months, but there's a high incidence that you will be urinary incontinent for the rest of your life. No, no way. I want to go the other way. And what I want to do in relation to this is I'm going to stop testosterone. So I had so many objections from so many medical people, both GPs, endocrinologists, urologists, but I stopped it. And within a couple of months having stopped it, I started developing breasts. So back to the endocrinologist, who at this stage started measuring both testosterone and estrogen. And what it was found at that time was, after having stopped the testosterone injections for 3 months, the amount of testosterone my body was producing was 0.01 or 0.02, whereas a male of my age at that stage should have been still in double figures. Not in my, what really started the ball rolling is my estrogen level was 1394. A normal female at my age would have expected female estrogen of 100 to 300. A pubescent girl would see her estrogen levels rise to somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000. So effectively, I was in female puberty. That was not the diagnosis from the endocrinologist or the urologist. It was decided that I had an estrogen producing tumor. So I spent the subsequent 2 years getting MRIs from head to toe. I had CAT scans, I had ultrasound scans. And the strange thing is, the consultant in the ultrasound says, is this the first time you've ever had this scan? I said, yes. He says, your gonads are undescended. You should have been getting these scans, from your 13, 14-year-old. He says there's a very high incidence of cancer for, males who have undescended testes. Now, that being said, it was finally decided, that, okay, I had hypogonotropic hypogonadism, my pituitary gland. I didn't have a tumor, but it just wasn't producing these precursor hormones. Ended up having to go to the general register office and say, here, look, what we found out is that I was born intersex. As it stands now, I'm 99.9% female. I would like to have my birth certificate changed to female. You're intersex, you were assigned male at birth. We only change birth certificates when they're wrong. If you're intersex, neither male or female on that birth certificate would be wrong, and we only change it if it is wrong. So what I was left with at that stage was having to go to the gender identity clinic to register for a transition, to go through the full transition process. Initially, what I was doing, I was living as a trans man. I was wearing binders. I was still wearing male clothes, but my breasts had fully developed. But in all intents and purposes, I was living as a trans man. female on the inside, trying to be male on the outside, but it got to the point where I couldn't do that any longer. So I started to go through the gender recognition process and contacted Leicester to go through the panel. And one of the first things I was told is, oh, your title, doctor, that's asexual, it's agender. We need to see that you were living as a woman. Using the title doctor means that we can't see that you were living as a woman. I was then charged through various things. I had two consultant psychiatrists who basically says, this person is female. And we're recommending corrective surgery, to make her female, to undo what was done at birth. The gender recognition panel says, we don't like how these consultant psychiatrists worded this. Now, these reports were for me to actually have surgery to do the correction. They didn't like how they were worded. It took me 4 years of constant repeating the process with Leicester. Now, one of those consultant psychiatrists is actually based in Leicester and is a fully recognized gender specialist. The other consultant psychiatrist was, the head of the gender identity clinic here in Northern Ireland, but the GRP, no, didn't like it. They didn't like how they worded it. They didn't use words like gender dysphoria because I wasn't transgender. I was intersex. And because they didn't use words like that, the panel didn't like it. I didn't actually get my gender recognition certificate until after I'd had surgery. Now, the surgery, when it first went, the consultant did a test, palpated for gonads, couldn't find one. Says, has anybody ever found it? I says, well, someone felt it on one occasion. It's, here, low down, in the left of, that area. And one or two people have actually palpated it, by sticking the finger up inside. The other could be palpated, down into, what was at that stage a partial scrotum. He said that because of my small size, and because I was a lesbian, they would be able to do constructive surgery, but it would take at least 2.5 hours to do that surgery, and I would have a very short depth. Now, when I came round in the recovery room, I looked at the clock and burst into tears. I said, why did they stop my surgery? It was just over 90 minutes from I had walked from my room to anesthesia, spent the time in anesthesia, transferred to the OR, had the surgery, which I didn't believe I had full surgery, had all the drains, and the dressings and all that done, and was woke up in recovery. And I burst into tears. I said, why did you stop? And the young nurse said, what do you mean? I says, look at the time. It's only just over 90 minutes since I left my room. I wasn't expecting, the surgeon said it would be 2.5 hours. He said, oh, no, surgery was complete. It was a complete success. Everything was completed. Everything was full. So back in the room, so relieved. I was due back, in 12 weeks' time for the review. I was told I would have a maximum vaginal depth of, vulva and vagina of 3 inches. To get any more than that, they would have had to start using, bowel tissue, etc. And because I was, a lesbian, they didn't see that as necessary. When I went back in 12 weeks' time and he measured my depth, it was over 5 inches. What had happened is that what he had created with my post-operation treatment had entered back into my original vagina, and the tissue had stretched and formed the full length of the vagina that I was born with. Now, in relation to that, we have the birth certificate abnormalities. We have, the aspect of trying to be recognized, as a woman, and all of those things have created serious problems throughout all of my life, rejection in so many ways. So I would like to, if you would hit the second presentation, please, Joe. This is just very short. I like to quote this. It's excerpted from a quote by Oscar Wilde. Selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking others to live as one wishes to live. And unselfishness is letting other people's lives alone, not interfering with them. Selfishness always aims at creating around it an absolute uniformity of type. Unselfishness recognizes infinite variety of type as a delightful thing, accepts it, acquiesces in it, enjoys it. A red rose is not selfish because it wants to be a red rose. It would be horribly selfish if it wanted all the other flowers in the garden to be both red and roses. Next slide, please, Joe. What I would say to you this evening, is today we can all be wildflowers in that beautiful meadow. We don't have to be red roses. Unfortunately, I have suffered so much because the medical system only recognizes males and females, and that has caused so many problems throughout my life. Last slide, Joe. Any questions, please? Thank you, Joe.
Fantastic, Sarah. Thank you so much. That was very insightful, and I'm sure people have some questions to ask. So I see at least one hand up already. Nigel? Nigel, if you want to unmute your device, or if you want to type your question into the chat.
I didn't actually raise my hand. I was just giving a round of applause by emoji.
I thought you were going to be asking about the Grieva Dodgers.
Yes, you remember. Thank you so much for updating me on that, by the way, Sarah. It was cracking me up not knowing that. I can say thank you very much for the presentation. It's always a delight to listen to your story.
Thank you so much, Nigel.
Wonderful. So,
yeah,
hand raised there. Yes, Elaine?
Yeah, Sarah, oh my God, that was just amazing. I mean, it was powerful and brave and raw and emotional all in one. And I have so many questions to ask, but I'll not be selfish. I'll not be Red Rose. And I'll only ask you one. So I suppose, Sarah, I mean, what can we do as a society to, I suppose, better help and support intersex people and understand intersex people better?
That's a wonderful question, Elaine. The first thing I would say is that what we need to do is to identify the difference between transgender and intersex. What I would say is that intersex is the physical non-binary, whereas transgender, is where someone feels that their physical self does not match their inner gender. Whereas with intersex people, they are physically born that way, you know, and they don't have a choice. Unfortunately, in so many occasions, other people make choices for them. So the first thing we would ask is that no, allow, unless it's life-threatening, don't perform infant surgeries. Secondly, support those people throughout their life. Now, in some ways, because of my surgery, even though I got a limited amount of abuse, you know, as a child and as a teenager, think what would have happened to me if I hadn't had the surgery. There I would have had a small penis and an operational urethra, and an operational vulva, an operational vagina, going to school. What might have happened to me if I was put into the male showers, put into the male changing room? Think what could have happened to me. What we need to do first is to stop those surgeries. B, to have intersex recognized as a normal variation, the same way as left-handedness. If we think of people, my eldest brother was left-handed. He got thumped day and daily with rulers, with canes, etc., because he wanted to write with his left hand. It was something that was totally unacceptable. Whereas nowadays, 10% of the population, are left-handed, and it's accepted as normal. What we want to do is say that variation sexual characteristics have existed whilst human beings have existed. Accept it as normal, and accept that intersex people can fall into various categories. You can have intersex people who don't want anyone to know they're intersex. You can have intersex people who say, I'm happy to live my life as I'm identified. We have intersex people whose actual physiology says, no, I can't live that way. My body's changing, and it's changing the opposite way that someone chose for me at the time of my birth. We have other people who would like to have their intersex category recognized as intersex, as a third gender, as a third sex, saying that I'm neither male, I'm neither female. I had to sign away rights so that I could be physically considered a female within the Northern Ireland Health Service. It's like that. And we need legislation. Hate speech, hate crimes, we need to recognize sexual characteristics to protect those. And the more that we stop and are successful with the surgeries, etc., the more important it is that we have a society, A, who understands and supports, and B, is prepared to prosecute those who aren't. Thank you, Elaine. That was a wonderful question.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great.
And anyone else got a question? If you don't, I'll jump in.
Can I just jump in there, Joe?
Yes, go ahead.
Sarah, thanks so much. That was very, very powerful. I think you, in terms of the medical profession's approach, it's absolutely shocking in terms of that you were forced down a route in terms of that, and their attitude towards the definition of female, with doctor being not female. it's just there's so many layers of there's a lot that needs done, but obviously.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Yes, there's two other people with their hands up.
Is the treatment of intersex in the UK, all over the UK, the same? And is it also the same in the Irish Republic?
The simple answer is yes. The strange thing is Northern Ireland doesn't have its own gender recognition panel. You actually have to go through the gender recognition office in Leicester. Irish Republic is slightly different in that you can actually attest that the gender or sex you were assigned at birth was incorrect, and you can have your birth certificate simply on attesting that no, you wish to be considered male or you wish to be considered female, contrary to that. So it's much simpler. They refused to recognize that, and we actually had a Tory government who went so far as to say, we will no longer accept gender recognition certificates from any country who has self, ability to change your sex, and they would no longer accept. It got so that bad in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So the simple answer is, there has been various times where people have tried to have their passport or their sexual declaration as non-binary or not male or female, and it's been right up to the House of Lords, basically saying, oh no, the legislation says you have to be male or female.
Excellent. So we've got 4 more people with their hands up. Sir, the top of the list is Nigel.
Hi, Nigel.
Hello again, Sarah. Now, Sarah, I am aware that it's very important to try and keep these meetings as close timed as possible. There is a handful of materials that I've come across in the meantime. I'll do my best to try and source them to you, and hopefully they'll be of use to you. At the same time, the last time that I had a little conversation with you, I had mentioned the very subject of if it would be possible and even necessary to try and establish an intersex community group and support group. Now, I'm absolutely for that myself. So how best can we address that very issue?
Well, the first thing we need to do is either for one of the other umbrella groups to develop a subcommittee, and develop that. Actually, my friend Jude has given me a lead into some funding. So we'll be looking at maybe using that funding to do 2 things. One would be to set up a committee with, say, under the umbrella of the LGBTQIA+. And the other would be to produce presentations or knowledge packs that could be given out age appropriate to primary schools, secondary schools, and to educational authorities, and in addition, and in particular, to the General Medical Council here in Northern Ireland. So certainly, Nigel, what we would need to do, and certainly I would be willing to help, set up such a body in Northern Ireland, specifically as either an adjunct of Intersex Ireland, or a separate identity from any of the existing bodies, looking specifically at promoting intersex awareness in Northern Ireland, and that would be, certainly that would be wonderful if we were able to progress that. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Next up, Alex and Sarah.
Oh,
Hello.
sorry.
That's me from the other room, love. I'm going to ask a question that I know the answer to, but I just want to bring the point home, and you and Nigel were touching on it there with the education point, and one of the a couple of the other questions in terms of what to do. You mentioned the intersex variations in sexual characteristics are as common as red hair. At least I think you mentioned that. I know it's one of the statistics, ways of wrapping our head around it. But just to address are intersex surgeries still occurring on infants in the UK and the Republic of Ireland?
The simple answer is yes. And just as an aside to that, Alex, thanks for bringing that point. A couple of years ago, we had a breakthrough in Germany in that they decided that what they would do is they would allow intersex to be a sexual, third sex on birth certificates. At first, that was great news until what we found out is that a great many parents of intersex children then started rushing their children into surgery to avoid that intersex category on the child's birth certificate. So it's horrifying that we do that. And what we have to remember is that in a lot of these cases, this surgery that's performed creates problems throughout that person's life. Even just in one simple, I give you one simple case of my own. Part and parcel of these urologists, they were sticking cameras all through my urethra and in the bladders and things like that. And what they did, taking one of those cameras out, it caught on scar tissue that they had used additional to stretch the penile scrotal repair, from its original position to the tip of the penis. That scar tissue was still present 50 odd years later, and they tore it. So these surgeries, they leave people with problems for the rest of their life. I was very blessed with a wonderful surgeon. So many other children are left having to have repeat surgeries throughout their life. And yes, Alex, they are still performing those. If they were to do it for a religious reason, it will be treated as female genital mutilation. Because it's done under the aegis of intersex birth correction, it's treated as being acceptable. And in a great many cases, it's treated as being necessary when it is totally unnecessary.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next up, we have a question from Jane.
Well, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm a bit of an interloper here because my home is in Exeter.
Yeah.
And I heard about this talk through a group I belong to called interconnecteduk.org.
Yeah.
And that's quite a good group to join for intersex people. My story connects quite a bit with yours.
Yeah.
Except that I grew up believing I was transgender until I found my medical records. And I had scars on my body.
Yeah.
But when I found out my medical records, I thought, oh, what's going on here? Because parents don't say anything to their kids. I mean, I think parents are told from doctors it's for the best, and that's all they're told. And so all these surgeries are carried out, and that you're quite unaware of it growing up.
Yeah.
So thank you for raising awareness of this, Sarah. It's a really important thing to do, I think. And you've really laid your life out there in a way that most intersex people don't.
No.
Thank you for that.
Well, being honest, my rationale for doing it is it's gone on too long, and my life's nearly over. I'm in my 8th decade. What I want more than anything else is to help stop other young people having to live a life that I lived. And I have been very blessed. In a great many cases, I have had a situation where other people have had far more medical complications than I ever did. One of my greatest regrets is that I've been a Christian basically all my life. Once I started living as the woman I was born, some of my closest Christian friends totally ghosted me and cut me out of their life totally. That hurt me greatly too. They, again, as you said, Jane, they link transgenderism and intersex and say, oh, it's a lifestyle choice. I was told by one close minister friend of mine, oh, the only people who'll be glad about you doing this are homosexuals. Well, but that was someone I grew up. I helped his wife go through her PhD. I considered them close lifelong friends, and yet they cut off. They wouldn't accept emails. They wouldn't accept telephone calls. They wouldn't accept messages. They just cut me out totally.
I happen to be a minister in the United Reformed Church.
Yeah.
But when I transitioned, I suppose if that's you call it that.
Yeah.
Again, I couldn't find a post anywhere for years, but ended up in Exeter. So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For being insightful. Yes, Gareth. Sorry, Joe.
Hello, and thank you very much, Sarah, for all you've shared this evening. You've shared a lot that's very personal, and it has courage to do that. And yet, I think it's given us, even those of us who like to think that we're quite knowledgeable about LGBTQIA+. It's given me a very particular insight into the challenges for intersex people. And interesting that you set it in historical context as well. And in fact, you almost feel that some of the historical civilizations had rather less difficulty with intersex than we do. My question, and it's a slightly unfair one, but we've seen lots of conjecture about variations of sexual development in the press recently after the Olympics. And a great deal of it is conjecture because people just don't know. And of course, that has created all kinds of arguments on Twitter and the like, which I'm sure must be very difficult to hear and to see. But it just, well, I suppose I'm interested in your reflections on all that's been happening over the last couple of months.
Well, in particular, again, there's this concatenation, between transgender and intersex. And now, believe it or not, it's over 20 years since the first transgender people were eligible to compete at Olympic Games. Now, for trans women at that stage, they were allowed to have testosterone levels up to 10 millimole. That was then cut to 5. That was then cut to 2.5. And now basically it's taken serious. That's for transgender people. That's, intersex, unfortunately is getting lumped into that. And what they do is they look at an intersex person and say, oh, we're going to apply transgender physiology, chromosomes, etc. to you and force you into that shoebox of transgender. Now, Gareth, I can tell you that during all of those Olympic Games, how many medals have been won by a transgender individual athlete in all of that time? 0. Not a single medal has been won, even when the level was up at 10 millimole. We have a situation where they compare those levels. I was reading just in the Times the other day there where we had a situation where a particular journalist was saying, "Oh, the 10 times the level of a female." What they do is they look at individual women, age range from 11 to 70, and they say the range for those women, for testosterone is 0.5 to 2.5. That's why it was shrunk down to the 2. That was putting them in the normal female range. The original 10 was more to equate with elite female athletes. Their testosterone range can be that high. That is what makes them exceptional athletes, combined with an elite physiology that the genes have blessed them with. We have this situation where they're now shoeboxing transgender and intersex into one category and applying the aspects of one over others. Now, as you mentioned, Garrett, there were 2 boxers, and basically, some of the headlines, was that, oh, there was a man in the ring beating the head of a woman. That was one of the headlines. The strange thing about it is there were 2 individuals at that World Championship who banned those 2 athletes. And what they did was they took it upon themselves. They then took it to their full committee and had that decision ratified. Now, when those 2 individuals were interviewed during the 24 Olympics, the 2 of them told different stories as about why those athletes were banned at that time. So they couldn't even get their own stories straight. And, as I say, we have this situation going forward, that we have to identify transgenderism and intersex, characteristics as 2 very identifiable different categories. As I say, intersex is the, physical non-binary, and, transgenderism is the gender, variations. But thank you, very important, Gareth.
And I think what came home to me tonight was, I hadn't realised that point about androgen receptors, and the fact, and it plays into the whole sports debate. You could have as much testosterone as you wanted if the androgen receptors aren't picking it up. It's doing nothing.
Like the last time I had my testosterone measured, when I was getting 4 weekly injections of libido, it was 27. I should have been like Arnie.
Fabulous. There's one more wee question in the chat. It's just about the percentage of the population in Northern Ireland would be intersex. Was it 1.7, Sarah?
1.7 is the general classification. As I say, what that is, and again, what will happen is now those born with ambiguous genitalia, it's only 1 in about 2,000 births would actually have ambiguous genitalia. Now, in the case of ovotestis, where I had an ovary and a testicle, and what happened is that testicle shut down totally by the time I was in my 50s. That's 1 in 20,000 births. So those that are much rarer. When they come to 1.7, it's when they take all the variations, in relation to that the 40 plus variations, when they're all added together, they come to something like 2 in every 100, 2 in every 100 births. So we do have a lot of intersex people in Northern Ireland. Now, take one intersex variation, which is total androgen insensitivity syndrome. Very often that is not diagnosed until that child is 14 or 15 years age. What happens is they're born, looking totally female. Their genitalia, is totally female. What happens is 11, 12, they start asking, where are my menses? I haven't had a period. My breasts aren't developing. They're put off by the GP saying, oh, you're just a late developer. By the time they get to 14 or 15, it's only then that they find that these children are X. Why? So chromosomally, they're male. Unfortunately, the situation is, from an endocrine point of view, they're 100% female. But, because there's this Y, even the Y chromosome within itself has an SRY leg. That SRY leg, if it is malformed, it doesn't cause virilization of the fetus in the womb. So the default for a human being is female. A number of things has to happen in the womb for that child to be born as a male. As we've seen, sometimes people have gone through their whole lives, and it's only when an autopsy was being performed that it was discovered that they were intersex. Because there's so much stigma to it, it's hidden, and the vast bulk of people don't want to put their head above the parapet. I don't want other people to go through what particularly if you look at those statistics, we're talking about 5-figure, people who are born with intersex variations in Northern Ireland alone. If you translate that figure, throughout the world, we're talking about over 100 million people who are born with intersex variations on this planet.
Wow. Interesting figures. And just at this point, then, I'm going to say thank you very much, Sarah. I'm going to end the recording.
Sorry, can I ask one more question? I noticed in the chat, Joe, the question that person had asked wasn't what was the percentage in Northern Ireland of people that had intersex, that what was the population number, I think they meant. So does that equate then to about 1,000 people in Northern Ireland?
No, it's much higher than that. If you take the population of Northern Ireland, somewhere in the region of 1.8 million, that's equating to something like 30,000 people.
Oh gosh, that's a lot.
Yes, precisely. And the vast bulk of those you will know nothing whatsoever about. It's a 50, thinking of it that way, it's nearly 1 in every 50 births, that person will be born with an intersex variation. As I say, some people may never ever discover it. Jane was saying earlier about her medical records. When this was all happening, I went and asked for my medical records. I was told, as far as my GP was concerned, they only had my medical records from age 18. I had to apply to have my childhood medical records released. When they were released, the first 3 years of my life, no medical records exist for.
Thank you.
So as I say, hopefully that may clarify some of the situations and what goes on, hiding. I have a friend who is a midwife in Nigeria who is raising 2 children. The reason she didn't give birth to those 2 children, those 2 children were given by 2 sets of parents who says, take that spawn of Satan and get rid of them, which she couldn't do, and she actually raised them herself.
Shocking.
Now, just when Nigel and I mentioned the term earlier, they're guiva dodges. That is a colloquial term when translated means grows a penis at 12. There are certain areas of the world, one of the most noted that the BBC and others did a study on is the Dominican Republic. 10% of all female births at the age of puberty grow a penis, their scrotum drops, their testes drop, and they become fully male. It's an accepted principle. Now, whilst those countries will recognize, that there are 3 variations, they only have 2 sex roles. So that intersex person has to accept that. Are they going to stay and act as female for the rest of their life? Are they going to accept the male role and go forward that way? Whilst they recognize the 3 conditions, they only have 2 sexes roles within their society.
Okay, I'm just going to end the recording here and then